Hi, my name is William, and this is my last minute player's tutorial on how to play Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Playing AD&D, especially when you are new to the game, can seem like a massive task. It's a much older system from a time when players and dungeon masters were expected to have already played war games, and so they bring their experience from fantasy war games or medieval war games and apply it to their time here. A dungeon master only needed to know everything that they could to understand what their role was as opposed to a regular game master and how the background mechanics work for Dungeons and Dragons. And players needed to know the extent of their options and abilities. Now, you'll notice in books, especially the player's handbook, that there are a lot of tables and a lot of very dense descriptions of how characters are affected by the choices you make. What you need to know from it are these things. To make a character, you must first roll your attributes. Strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, and charisma make the primary attributes that define your character. Strength handles your damage and ability to lift and carry weight, bend bars, and break open doors. Intelligence determines the number of spells you can learn, know, and the maximum amount of spells you can gain per level, as well as additional languages you may learn on the way. Wisdom affects your magical attack ability, your bonus spells for clerics and druids, and your percent chance to fail spells when you cast them. Dexterity affects your reaction to surprises, as well as for your defense against missile attacks and your armor class. Constitution affects your hit points, the amount of health you gain per level on top of your hit dice. Your system shock, which is your resistance against things like poisons or disease, and your chance to survive a resurrection spell. So sometimes you might just not resurrect when that spell is cast on you. Charisma affects the amount of henchmen you can gain to follow you and your leadership, as well as their loyalty, as well as strangers' reactions to you when you first. Your abilities determine your race. So a dwarf can't have constitution lower than a certain bit. An elf can't have constitution higher than a certain number. I believe it is like 10 and 15 respectively. All you need to know is that they have a minimum and maximum score that you can roll for at the start. These can change over the course of the game depending on items or certain boons you might receive. But otherwise, you need to know how to read the special abilities and proficiencies, as you're generally within a percentage and you roll against that percentage when it is called for. Now, for your first game, I would recommend you play a human or half-elf, since they don't have ability score adjustments per se, but they do also open the most options for you when starting the game. Of course, one thing to cover are skills. There are no true skills everyone gets in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Remember, this is a war game after all. The only people who get actual rollable skills that are applied to them like the entire game are thief skills. But every character can get a background, professions listed within the Dungeon Master's Guide. However, these are just fluff and only describe what your character might know knowledge-wise. Now, when making an action, it's good to describe how you'll do something over consulting a dice or consulting a roll. So if you're in a room with a moose head, with a stuffed moose head, in an OSR game or Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, generally how you'll interact with it is, instead of saying, I roll to investigate, or I roll to know if there's a secret door, you're going to go there and you're going to describe it. Describe, hey, I run my hands behind it, I pull on an antler, or I twinkle the nose. And the DM will describe kind of how those reactions, how those actions affect you or affect your game, but they don't necessarily require a skill roll. Your DM will generally be, a good DM will generally be good at telling you when you need to roll your skill. The next most important choice outside of race is our classes. And classes are restricted by race, so a dwarf can't play a paladin or a mage. Halfling can't play a monk, and a half-orc can't really play a ranger. But this can be easily changed by the DM. If you want to play a class that is not standard for your race, make sure you ask your dungeon master, and they are more than happy to let you know if they have made any differences on rules as written. For your classes, you start with fighters, rangers, paladins, clerics, druids, thieves and assassins, and magic users. Fighters, rangers, and paladins all fall under fighter and their subclasses. They are your mainline warriors, requiring the most strength, dexterity, and charisma so that they may not only hit hard, but hit consistently. And their charisma should be to recruit more henchmen, that they can play a more tactical game and provide a better front line to protect your support classes like your clerics and your magic users. Paladins differ from fighters in that they can improve others around them with holy auras and kind of a magical presence that inspires. And rangers can track down items and targets using their skill and knowledge of the area. All fighters will be proficient with most weapons, but paladins and rangers lose their abilities if they defy their oath and code respectively. So if a ranger stops being good, then they're no longer a ranger. And if a paladin stops being lawful good, then they are reduced to little more than a fighter. Clerics and druids are religious representatives of their respective domains. So clerics serve the gods and the druids serve nature. They require high wisdom scores above all, and they need this to cast as many spells as they can. And the cleric, tends to use this for more healing and area control spells, and the druid uses their divine power or their natural powers to be more in direct combat or in a direct damager to enemies with like thorns and the shillag and other such spells. You also have monks, which are kind of a spiritual fighter. They're kind of like a spiritual fighter in the same way that a paladin is like a cleric and a fighter, but they just trade their weapons for fist, and they have better abilities or like climbing. I recommend clerics for beginner players who want to try spellcasters because they take a more background role that supports. You can see how other players, especially fighters, handle their game. Thieves and assassins are your skill monkeys in a way. They have the rollable skills with proficiencies in like climbing walls, opening doors, and moving silent. They're essentially keep around especially tricky dungeons with lots of secret doors and crevices and cliffs. They must be dexterous with good strength too, largely the fighter with a greater focus on dexterity. But thieves are more like ambushers, strikers, and flankers, while assassins, they take these roles, but they can do greater single target damage or do more things they need in order to gain more money from killing people. They are quite literally assassins, killing for hire. Magic users are the most versatile spellcaster, and they're the last on this list because they are the hardest to play with a D4 and hit dice. Yikes! 1d4 every level, and they don't even, I think they get a maximum of 14 hit dice. Now, they have all your classic wizard spells that when you hear, wizard, and that's like shocking grass, or burning hands, or fireball, and read magic. MUs are support characters largely who focus more on changing the landscape of the battle to their side. Direct damage spells are largely hard to come by, like you have ones like magic missile, and their effectiveness is dubious most of the time. However, their utility is what's key. So magic missile would be to target an enemy that's especially pesky or hard to hit. It's really far away or even really close and giving your fighters a trouble time. And fireball can be to set an explosion and kill a large swath of enemies at a single time. They're very great, but I don't recommend them for brand new players. However, they are fun. I play a wizard, a magic user, if you will. Now, when you actually play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the flow of the game works like this. You gather your party and decide where to move and what to do around the world, generally in allegiance with a quest that your DM has granted you, either by the adventure or by his own design. The game time is split into turns. A turn represents 10 minutes of real time. So 6 turns equals an hour. And you have, so many turns in a day, so many hours in a day, and you have to decide how you want to divvy up your rest periods and your, how, like, interacting with most things will take a turn. So if I move, a section of the map, it will take a turn. And then when I stop in town and talk to somebody, that will take a turn as well. And this goes on, and you can like interact with, walls in a dungeon or with artifacts, and you can pick up certain items and magical abilities and capture loot and all the fun stuff of D&D. But then you really want to get to the meat of it, combat. The flow of the game begins to change. Instead of turns, you have to rely more on rounds. Rounds are like 1 minute segments now. So there are 10 rounds in a turn, and then even further, a round is split into segments. So if you're following me, that's 1 turn is 10 minutes, a round is 1 minute, and a segment is 6 seconds. So that's 10 segments in a round, 10 round turns, 6 turns in an hour. Now, when you meet an enemy, or when your DM starts an encounter, which is what it's called, you have to roll what's called surprise. Surprise is a d6 roll off to see who is like caught off guard by an enemy that's like within, say, 5 feet of you. Like if they pop out of nowhere, how you resist that ambush or how you react. If you complete the surprise, you get to hit first, and the monster completes the surprise, you get to hit. If you roll the same, reverses, the surprise is called off, and you're not really surprised. And then whoever wins the surprise gets a free attack. Once all of those attacks are resolved, we can go into the flow of the game. Each round starts with initiative. Roll initiative. I tend to roll a d20. In the rules, it's 2d6. I do a d20 for familiarity, and then, if you roll the same initiative as somebody else, you add your weapon speed factor, you compare your weapon speed factors, and then whoever has the lowest speed factor goes first. As, once your turn comes, or once your segment comes, right, you get to decide what to do. You can move up to your maximum movement speed, which, unarmored is probably like 90 feet in game, or like 6 inches, like 4 tiles. And you select a target, you roll a d20, and you add any bonus like magic or dexterity, and compare it with your THAC0, or your to hit armor class 0, or the number on your attack. Then you subtract the armor class of your enemy from your THAC0, and if your complete to hit roll is equal to or higher than the number that you get, you hit. This is my combat example. So this is my character. That is a level 1 fighter, and they're fighting outclassed here against a skeleton and a bugbear. They have a character there, but we're just going to ignore them for now, focus more on our character. And since this is a hex map, they are 1, 2, 3 inches, 1, 2, 3 inches away from these 2 enemies. So they're not necessarily going to be surprised this round once combat begins. To begin, they are wielding a scimitar, which generally means any kind of curved bladed weapon in 1st edition. And they have a damage between 1 through 8, so that means they get to roll a d8 for damage, to keep it simple. And they have a weapon speed factor of 4. You can see here I listed in bold, they're to hit armor class 0 of 20. And we begin combat by rolling the individual initiatives for our characters. Excuse me. So this character rolled a 1. The skeleton has an 18, and our character has an 11. Perfect. And because we're not in range, we don't get a surprise round. Since combat began and our bugbear just so happens to also be wielding a scimitar, they gain the first move, and so they move 2 inches of movement in order to come towards me. Now, they have 10 hit points of damage. They get 1 attack. So I happen to be wearing full plate armor, so that means my armor class is going to be a 2. So the bugbear is going to have to roll their armor, like their Thaco table, so they miss on me, which is very lucky for me because I'm very weak at first level. And now it's my turn. I can spend my action to either run away, but because I'm a very silly first level fighter, I'm going to press on the attack. And so I'm going to try and strike the bugbear with my scimitar. Remember, I only have 1 attack. I rolled a 9. Now their armor class is a 5. So we know that our Thaco is 0. We're trying to hit a 20. Let's see what happens when we subtract 5 from our Thaco. So that's 15. And I rolled a 9. So 9's not greater than 15. And I miss, and I don't do damage. But let's say I did hit. Let's say I rolled a 16. So I know his armor class is 5. Rolled higher than a 15. I rolled 16. And so I get to do damage. I get to apply 5 damage to the bugbear, which is very good for me. A spellcaster, right? So that finishes our segment of combat, and we move on to the next segment, right? Let's say I wasn't a fighter. Let's say I was a spellcaster, right? So if we move this guy back, magic users, they have all kinds of spells. You're going to read in the spell list that certain spells take certain segments, and this is why a lot of classes would be considered, like, magic users, clerics, and so on would be considered support classes, because you'll see, and weapon, certain spells have casting time. So something like, let's say a good spell like web. Web takes 2 segments. So if Bub goes first, or the bugbear goes first, right? Then come at me, and then I decide to start casting my spell. I have to skip this segment, and then the spell casts on the next segment of combat. So I'm preparing the spell, and he has an opportunity to attack me, and I can't defend myself. And I'm a wizard, so I have 1d4 hit dice, and he'll probably kill me, right? But, so strategy in this game revolves around having frontline fighters, like so, to defend your casters or mages, and maybe even sometimes you'll have a thief who can move around and attack from behind where they have a lower armor class, so that wizards and clerics can spend the most amount of time they can trying to cast their spell. But I'm getting ahead of myself. All you need to know at the end of the day, above all else, if you're confused, make sure you consult your dungeon master and listen about as carefully as any dungeon master is happy to help someone along. If you need to consult the book, that's fine. And you probably should if both of you can't come to a solid agreement. But if you don't have access to the books yourself, I'll leave a link to OS Arwick below, which is a fairly accurate representation of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons first edition rule set for free. And that is a quick rundown of how to play Advanced Dungeons & Dragons at the last minute.